Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you're enjoying the full conversation with Mooji from last week's episode as well. If you haven't heard the song, The Light of Truth, it's out wherever you listen to music. And it's fun to be able to take podcasts sometimes and put them to music. So let us know what you think. This week, I have a conversation with Shane Mauss. Shane Mauss has been on the pod before. Always fun, always funny. He's a professional comedian, and he has his own podcast as well. His new one that he does with Ramin Nazer is Mind Under Matter. So it's a great podcast. But something kind of cool they're doing is a campout festival. So like a real-world music, comedy, art, science, and wellness workshop festival, September 9th through 11th in Raleigh, North Carolina. The link is in the show notes. So definitely some crossover with our community. And if that's something you're looking for, you're looking for that kind of outdoor, real world experience, then check it out. See what you think. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be amazing. They're definitely pushing boundaries with podcasts into the real world and mixing comedy and science, which is a lot of what the conversations that I often have with Shane are like. And I wanted to talk with him because when we finished our last podcast, I was like, I'd like to talk to you about free will, because I know he has a lot of information about that from a science perspective, sort of determinism versus free will. And I want to be challenged on my own ideas. And free will is really at the basis of a lot of my own thinking, of my beliefs, and sort of it's part of the crux of a lot of the stuff that, it's a lot stems from there, from a lot of things I share with you all. So it was good. It was really good to get in this conversation, and I'm sure that you are going to enjoy it as well. Also want to give a shout out to our new members on the Patreon. We have Thomas and Alicia. Thank you so much for signing up. At patreon.com/eastforest is a way to support this podcast. I get to share things over there like demos. We do a monthly Zoom council meeting, other fun things like that. So if you'd like to support this podcast, please check it out. Patreon.com/eastforest, and everything else is over at eastforest.org, like our merchandise, touring events, and retreats. And speaking of retreats, actually, the Esalen retreat in December 9th through 12th, I believe, it's a Friday to Monday, is going to be ticketing very soon. And we will do our best to find out before and let everyone know via the newsletter. So if you sign up at eastforest.org for the newsletter and you're interested in coming to that, we'll do our best to let you know in advance, because they fill up very quickly. It's limited to a certain number of spots that we can fit inside the room. And if you have been to Esalen or you haven't, of course, it's a really special space. And I do those retreats with my partner, Marissa Rada-Wepner, and we dig into movement and sound and ceremony, and generally just an exploration of the inner landscape, of course, with music weaving through all of it, and more than anything, the landscape of that ocean, the hot springs, and just being immersed in those liminal spaces, like quite literally, the edge of land into sea. It's a powerful place. I always like places where the sun sets anyway, because it's calmer. It's a good vibe for me. I'm a West Coast kid. But thank you for sharing the podcast and for saying hi. You can always do so at info@eastforest.org, or on the socials, East Forest on Instagram, East Forest Music on those other platforms of distraction. All right, let's get into this conversation with our dear friend, Mr. Shane Mauss. Shane Mauss, good to see you again.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, a lot of people might not be able to see this. Some might on YouTube clips, but you've got this wonderful sheet behind you.
Ah, you love my sheet.
Well,
I changed the color for you.
Yes, and you have a light, I think, as well behind you.
Yeah, and you weren't supposed to see that.
And it cracked me
But
up because just before we started, when you were pulling out, if it's still sitting there, you had these large things for your Camp Out Festival.
yeah, this is Ramin Nazar's art brought to life, making these full-size versions of
Yeah,
things
but you
that are
were
like,
you were behind the curtain, and the whole curtain's kind of like shaking and moving, and it's like the metaphor of like the man behind the curtain. It was
oh
all just too
yeah.
funny to me.
When people see my studio, they're like, "Oh, this is all that it takes to have such a good-looking podcast." Like, well, no, we also have an amazing editor, Matt McCool, and we have Ramin's art to like make everything, put it all together, and make it make sense. Because when I started this, I may have explained this in the past when you praised my tapestry. When Ramin and I started working together, I was like, well, it was April of last year, and I was like, how would I make something? How could we make a studio that's uniform for both of us, and we could travel with it? Like, I want it to be able to fit in a suitcase. And so we got some thin LED lights and the sheet. So I'm in Raleigh right now. You thought I was in Wisconsin.
I thought you were in
moved.
like a studio, Shane. I thought you were in.
A lot of people do. We have people tricked. Yeah, it's
undisclosed location.
Yeah, so no matter where I'm at, I can set this up, and it's not too much of a pain, and we get a pretty decent final result. You know, I love the. You've probably found this that I like problem solving. I'm putting together this Mind Under Matter Camp Out Festival, and there's a lot of just fun problem solving that goes into it. But
yeah,
there's like, for example, Ramin and I did this octopus episode on Mind Under Matter recently. And it was secretly, it's to like build towards some of the art and stuff that we're making for the fest. But I just decided to go on a deep dive of octopus, and my camera was having some issues. I was having some focus issues, and I was like,
see, octopus,
what do we do
alien
about that?
Spirits, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, well, how do we fix this? And so I was like, Ramin, could you just make the art piece with us in a submarine, and then we'll have instead of our usual TVs, put it in a submarine, and then we can have our editor just add fog to a window and bubbles and stuff anytime my camera was acting up. And it looks so much cooler than a regular episode would. So there's all these fun ways that you can take a problem and turn it into better than it would have been had there not been a problem. And I think that's something that where humans are really can be quite good at, and should try to embrace that more.
Well, it may be that the tension, the friction, shall we say, is the point. You know, we're always kind of avoiding that, but it seems to be like the reason why we're here. But am I like on a screen like up here, or are you? Is you have like multiple screens going on in your CNN studio?
Do you want me to? I can shift things around in kind of a janky way so that I'm.
No, you do what you need to do. This is mostly
so that
audio for people.
I'm looking mostly like at the camera.
I just want to make sure that there wasn't like someone standing there who's like, you guys are.
No,
telepathic communication.
So yeah,
I'm trying to get your attention.
I can look at the camera more. It's weird. We set it up so that it would look like we were looking at Ramin and I would be looking at each other, like in a
if I was
studio
like this,
thing.
Maybe?
Yeah. Then it looks like we're looking at each other.
I see.
And so I would need to move things around to make it look like I'm.
But so you have two podcasts right now. It's Mind Under Matter, and you still have your original show, right?
Yeah, here we are, where I interview a scientist each week.
Right, keep yourself busy. And the
to what end, I don't know. Podcasting can be really challenging. I started Here We Are as like a hobby, just because I was on the road as a stand-up, and I was like, what if I just looked up scientists in every city that I went to and interviewed them about just peculiar things. And that's how it all started. And I didn't ever take it seriously because I was just like, well, I have my stand-up and I'm touring with that. And then once I didn't have stand-up anymore, which I'm starting to do again, I was like, oh, trying to make a living doing this is very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially today with content, it's just insane. I was just like, I listened to like my release radar on Spotify because it's the artist I'm tracking, mostly just sort of lay the land, see what people are making, that kind of thing. And even in the music world, it seems like there's such a preponderance of energy put into more content that a lot of the stuff I'm hearing these days, I'm just like, really? Like there's less and less that's really grabbing me where I'm like, wow, this is some innovative shit. This is inspiring me. It's more and more like, please don't play this one again. Please don't play this one again.
Yeah.
And you think about like TikTok, man. I mean, because you guys are doing video for your podcast as well. And I'm imagining you're in this game, shall we say, of trying to create content. Like, do you go long form with it? Or are you making small things, or how are you deciding to interface with the matrix?
Yeah, so I'm all about long form. It's what I love, and it's funny because I started. So when you're talking about that friction, so when I started my comedy career, I was a traditional stand-up comedian.
Yeah,
I got a lot of late night spots. I caught a lot of breaks early on, doing the traditional route of within you can hit a stage, you can grab an audience's attention immediately, and you have 5 minutes of just boom, 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 solid kind of like one-linery, like sort of absurdist humor. And then from my success with that, I then had the opportunity to be a full-time headliner on the road. And then that's a very different context where now you have 45 minutes to an hour, and now these short, hey, set up here, I make everyone uncomfortable for 30 seconds, and then I have this great punchline that spins it all around and makes it okay, and now we can laugh, and oh, that's an unexpected turn that just took. And that formula, after 25, 30 minutes of that, the audience just starts getting wise to it. And you really kind of need to keep the audience on their toes and keep them guessing to have that element of surprise, at least that in the style that I was utilizing. And so then I was like, do I tell longer stories? I started integrating some stories into my act. And this is where the friction stuff comes in, because so much of it was about exploring my comfort zone. So early on, it was like, can I say all of these like outrageous, like absurdist sort of things in a way and still be comfortable? And I did that. And then starting to tell stories on stage, I just remember being like, wow, if this story doesn't work, you're just on stage for 7 minutes bombing, and there's no... my old model of like, here's a joke, now here's another joke, and you're maybe getting 2 jokes in a minute or something, right, like
pivoting.
You have something that bombs, and like, it doesn't even matter. You're next on the next thing, so you're on to the next thing. So 7 minutes of just like, oh, what if people don't care about the time that I went to see Duck Dynasty the musical when I was drunk or whatever, and that's like a 12-minute hunk of material.
Yeah, they're waiting for the payoff. They're waiting for that turnaround, and they want to be surprised. I mean, it's a real art, bro. You're talking about structure, which is what takes. That's, for instance, like I'm working on a documentary, and it's like, well, or a book, for instance. Like, it's not that hard to write like an interesting few pages about an idea. What's really hard is structuring that into a coherent story, arc, argument, act structure. I mean, that is difficult. That's why when you see it done well,
Yeah.
you're like, damn, that was so good.
That's when I cry in movies, it's very rarely a sad scene. It's usually like the mastery of like.
When was the last time you cried at a movie? I remember one. While you're thinking about it, I'll tell you.
Hit me.
Did you see Sound? I think it's Sound of Metal. I can't believe I didn't even remember the title.
No, the
Sound
deaf
of
guy,
Silence,
right?
Sound of Silence.
The deaf musician or something.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I won't spoil it, but basically the end, and it was really the sound design is what got me, and I think it was just so close to home because it's about hearing, and of course, I thought about myself if I couldn't hear, but it also turned it into like this, like very like spiritual thing that was just wow. It was amazingly well done as the filmmaking. I think it was Oscar situation nomination, but.
I mean, I remember crying at like Spider-Man 2.
I mean, look, if it makes you feel any better, there's probably like a few hundred writers of the best being like, how do we pull on the heartstrings of people? I mean,
yeah, and he saves the subway with all the webs. It's going off the rails, but he loses his mask in the process, and they grab him and take him in and protect him and put his mask back on for him. Like, oh my God. That's so beautiful. But, so
I could have been Spider-Man.
Once in a while, it seems to always be the most embarrassing time. I think because it's unexpected, because I wouldn't have ever walking into Spider-Man 2, the last thing in my mind is like, am I going to cry during this film?
I cry on airplanes. There's something about altitude in like movies on planes. It's like a 4x cry potential. It could be anything, and I'll try to hide it from like the people I'm sitting next to.
Laughter,
I'm embarrassed.
too, I try to hide because it's like so out of context, and I have an insane laugh. Like when I really laugh, like it's crazy.
It scare people on an airplane.
Yeah. And that airplane, that you're having this very personal experience next to other people that don't want to hear your personal experience happening, and something about that, something about the resistance of trying not to cry, trying not to laugh. I've always thought the funeral laugh is one of the best laughs that there is, because you're sitting in a funeral and you're just like, you don't, at least I'm 42. Fortunately, I don't find myself going to many funerals. And so you go and you're kind of trying to remember the correct, like, rituals and stuff, and I'm holding. Do I hold my hands in the like prayer thing? Do I close my eyes? I'm just like trying to do the right thing, and then a little thought comes in my head as like, well, whatever you do, don't laugh. That's the worst thing you could do in this situation is laugh during a funeral, and the very idea of that is just too powerful and silly that I'm like, now I'm like giggling under my breath at the very idea of like, oh my God, don't laugh right now. That would be horrible not to laugh. And yeah, there's something really funny about that, being crying on a plane, laughing on a plane. It's just, it's odd.
Yeah. My buddy, Mark Grachowski, or Mark Tom, he does this whole photography thing where it's people eating and crying. And then I had friends, man, this is
Wait, what? Eating and crying?
Yeah, I had two friends. This is even stranger. Two friends who went down this path. The others were 20 years ago. Before YouTube, they started a basic website where they hosted videos and you could submit yourself crying and eating. And they ended up like on the Leno show. And this is before YouTube, so it's sort of like, have you seen the crying and eating videos? There's Casimir. I got to look it up now.
This is amazing. I just love that. I love that. So is it authentic crying that people are doing, that they're just
Casimir Nachowski? Yeah, I mean, he and I went to college together. I mean, I would say most are not. So it's more like you're trying to come up with situations that's a little because it's the pausing to eat. You know, it's like someone's crying, sobbing, and then
yeah.
and it's funny. It's strange. And so Mark does it with just still images, but it's more like you're imagining, you're just seeing an image of it. But the other was a video.
There's so much you can do with that. Yeah, of course. Of course, you know, two people that are competing.
They both came
with
up
each
with the
other
same genius 2 decades apart. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love. I mean, eating such an odd social circumstance as well, because we certainly have you know, a good 400,000 years of eating around other humans that has evolved. And why is it still this awkward? Am I eating too fast? Is my mouth too open?
Schmutzing.
And then some people talk too loud in a restaurant too.
Yeah.
Like that bothers me a lot when I'm with someone and they start telling a story and it's too loud. I'm like, you can't. I know that you're referencing some satirical comedy show or something that you saw recently, but you are talking very loudly about a toilet baby right now. And this is a restaurant. Like, what are you how are you lacking this an otherwise smart person lacking the social awareness to know better than to talk about like their sex life or whatever very loudly at a restaurant?
Got a couple of those friends that they always have to say the thing that's just why are you saying that right now? You know, going back though, just to give you some props, because I was actually talking about this yesterday. I was telling Rada we were going to talk. You're talking about like 45-minute, hour-long sets. We listened to your a while back, your comedy album. I believe it's on Spotify. The bit about the blind guy.
Oh yeah, that was my first album. Yeah,
it's very good. I mean, I highly recommend. What's it called? The album?
Jokes to Make My Parents Proud.
It's very funny. It's very well done. Like, I mean, it's tight. It's tight, man. I mean, it's old school, but that's what makes it so good. It's like
that was old Shane. That's like what I was meant to do.
It was tight,
and that's what I was really like. You know, I was a prodigy at that particular style, and then I kind of abandon it completely.
Well,
and
it's
I
the
usually think that I'm
style.
crazy.
I mean, it's not easy to do. You have to have tight jokes. You know,
yeah.
That whole bit. I don't want to ruin it, but it's fun. It's very fun.
Yeah, that came from. I was having dinner with an ex-girlfriend one day, and she was talking about some blind colleague of hers, and she started talking about how blind people have this etiquette when they're using their cane, where it's like considered rude within the blind community to have too wide of a sweep.
A wide swing, right?
Yeah, and I thought, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Blind people should be able to do whatever the heck they need to do to get around in life. And it's everyone else's responsibility to make way for the blind experience and to help in whatever way you can. And then I just thought that was so absurd. And so I turned it into this satirical joke of, I don't remember how the bit goes, but
I remember the punchlines. I won't go there, but it's very funny. And it's you're taking it from the perspective of like a blind person who's angry. And it's just like, look at this guy. You know,
look at this guy swinging his cane around with no social awareness whatsoever.
What an asshole!
Yeah, I wish you could see what a dick you were right now. Yeah. I mean, that's such a funny idea. A lot of my bits came from just like seeing the absurdity and just other things that people would tell me. Like I had a joke early on and got me a lot of attention because it was a very brave joke to do. I opened my first Conan with it, and it was just about how I had this great idea the other day for a bumper sticker. It just says on it, "I am a child molester," and everyone in the audience would just get so completely uncomfortable. This is the first thing out of my mouth when I hit the stage, and it was like the tension in the room would be so unbearable for everybody, and I'd just be like, "Oh, hold on a second, there's a little more to it than that. You don't put it on your car," and then this energy release of like, I always loved playing with tension like that. Like, what a ridiculous and awful practical joke to do to someone else, to put this on their car. And that was just, I had a friend that always had the dumbest ideas for, like, he was always making, like, he really took to the idea of like, oh, you can just have someone make a hat for you that can say whatever you want. And he always had just the dumbest ideas, always. And I just thought, what would be the dumbest thing? Like, what's the absolute
someone's
worst
punking me
thing?
in our house right now. Someone's been sending us a subscription to People magazine for over a year. And we hate it. And it's embarrassing. And when people come over, I try to hide it, or I try to give no one. And it's like, this is brilliant. And I'll never know who did it. You know, it's probably $25 for them, or $20.
I love that.
And I was like, I'm going to start sending people random magazines.
Oh my gosh, yes. I love that.
It is embarrassing. People come over and they're like, I can't believe you subscribe to People. I never thought you'd be the guy.
It is. I mean, there's so much of I think about this concept quite a bit of it. It's like these magazines. So I think about kind of in relation to social media, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's this area of research about grocery stores in particular. There's a lot of things that are studied, which is like there's things about samples, like the way in which you display samples is something that's been well studied. And so what happens is, if you have, so early on, what's wonderful about science is it tests many of our intuitions, and what we get to find out is that most of life is very counterintuitive. You know, you take to rock climbing or something like that, and you realize once you get good at it, oh, it's way less about the arms and just hulking your way up a wall than you would think just by observing it. And marketing is so much like that as well. So there was all these kind of like jam studies early on where, well, this company, they have 25 different kinds of jams. Isn't that amazing? 25 different kinds. So let's just display and give samples to all of these jams. And what they found from that was the greater variety in which they're displaying something that will get more attention, more people will come in, but way fewer people will buy, because there will be analysis paralysis of like, I got to pick between 25 jams. Guess what? I just realized I don't give a fuck about jams. Whereas if you have like 3 or 4 jams there, people try one, like, oh, blueberry jam. All right, maybe I'll try some of this at home. So there's this whole area of research directly relating to grocery stores. And one of the really interesting things is that, and this isn't, so many people think when they hear things like that this is this Machiavellian plotting of
it's the cabal. Everyone is like, they just go straight
this
to
is the grocery store cabal. They're plotting against us to get more of them. And most of what's happening is just this natural emergent property of success, of places that have stumbled upon this counterintuitive thing that happens to do really well for them, and it takes off, and then other people just copy what is successful. And one of the things that I think about every time I'm at a grocery store, it changes the way that I do grocery stores, is that, you walk into a grocery store, what's the first area you go into?
Usually produce.
Exactly.
is
Produce.
usually,
Almost
fresh foods.
always produce. And there's a psychological thing that happens when you do that, which is that you're getting strawberries and pears and you're getting all of this healthy stuff. And then you leave the produce and now you're in the cereal aisle.
Boxville.
And
Yeah.
exactly. And you just did all of these good things. What a saint you are to yourself that you've just, I'm gonna eat healthy now, and you've used much of your cognitive effort making these healthy decisions, and now your prefrontal cortex is a little more worn down by decision making because it's like, well, you don't exactly know what makes a good asparagus, or and now you get to the junk food and you don't have the same cognitive resources to make the best decisions. And in addition to that, you have already done your good deed for the day.
Good deed for humanity.
Yeah, you got a banana. And so, like, you deserve a little bit of cereal. Why not? Some Captain Crunch or whatever. Well, then you get to the register after making all of these. And this might seem trivial, but it's because we aren't really familiar with our non-conscious lives a lot. And I know the last time I was on, I was like, it'd be fun to have a free will conversation.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I do want, that actually is why I wanted to talk, but
this
no
is
rush.
along those lines.
Yes, exactly.
This is along those lines. So there's studies where they'll have people, and this will be related to the grocery store. There's people that they have them in a lab, and you go and you fill out some sort of form, some sort of survey, and now you need to walk across some hallway to turn in the survey, and there are snacks in the middle of that hallway, and there's veggie trays and stuff like that, and there's also cookies. Well, depending on how difficult the task was, if they just gave you an IQ test, chances are you're getting the cookie. If they just gave you something very simple and basic, you still have those kind of cognitive resources and the energy to make the more long-term, avoid the prefrontal cortex is much of it, and it's especially large and distinct in humans. So much of it is about doing the hard thing when it's in the moment, when it is the best thing for you long term. And so if you are tired or at the end of the day, or you've made a lot of decisions and have decision fatigue, you've depleted those resources, and you're going to go cookie instead. And it's packed full of sugar and everything else. And so that leads into the grocery store situation, where now you get to the checkout. Now here's where they have the worst stuff. Now here's where they have the little bits of candy and everything. You took your kid with you. This is an unavoidable, good luck getting through that without getting a candy bar or something if you have a kid with you. Even if you're just an adult by yourself, Good luck not hitting up the People magazine or taking in the gossip, or because all of that stuff, gossip, which is we're social animals, gossip is that, like, oh man.
Isn't it funny that's where it's peddled the most, is at the grocery store? It's at the end. It's like the gossip mags in the...
It's when you're your weakest.
But it's like, where we get food.
It's junk food.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another kind of food.
It is.
We were talking about, what is it called? Where there's too many choices? What'd you call it? Cognitive
there's analysis paralysis, but then there's just cognitive fatigue, so
you just think about, amplify that to the rest of our lives, the amount of information coming in, and then I think like, well, then what kind of effect is that having on my ability to make any choices in my life? And then what does that result in?
Exactly. And it's, oh my gosh, and we're in such an impossible situation where we now just have so many things at the tips of our fingertips. That's the other thing.
All of them are like the most intoxicating candy bar magazine, essentially. And all of them are made into bite-sized snack form. So it's like, well, it's just this little piece.
Yeah.
And then another little piece. Oh, God, I have to have another chip. It's so good. It's not that big a deal. What does it do? It's not making me fat. I'm just eating here, and it's an addiction.
You've taken all of berries. The fact that we can go into a store and just get all of the berries that we want in whatever variety is so unlike our evolutionary past. And to come across berries in your evolutionary past, to be able to just get that much sugar and store it away in your fat cells for the days where you come up short is such a boon. I mean, I think the act of I think the very act of giving flowers was perhaps an evolutionary byproduct of this, where you would have, mostly men going out hunting, exploring the new area, because gathering was always a more consistent source and usually greater source of nutrition in hunter-gatherers. And hunting was a lot more about advertising skill than it was about getting resources. That's debatable, because cooking meat clearly led to a larger brain size in us. But regardless, if you're out and you see flowers, well, flowers is the sign of future growth of berries and the wildlife that will come to eat it. And so I figure, and this is like a just so story and not a testable hypothesis, which I would be wary of, but fun to speculate on. I think that if you see these flowers and you're out and about and you bring it back to a lady, you're advertising, even before there's language, that you have found a source of future food. What's even better than that is you don't need to tell them where it is. So they're dependent on you. And that might be like kind of the evolution of giving flowers. The point is that's how, no matter what you think of that, that's how rare berries and that source of sustenance was. And now we can just compress all of that into a Jolly Rancher that's 1,000 times sweeter than. And Jolly Ranchers I have just to keep myself from eating 1,000 of them, because if they were gummy, I would just have a stomach ache immediately.
Yeah.
And now we have this problem of abundance, and it is hard to say. So last thing, because I'm now recognizing that I'm blabbing a lot regarding this. Regarding this kind of decision fatigue. Have you heard about the Judge study? It's getting to be like fairly famous out there. It's amazing and profound and troubling. So they were trying to in trying to study and improve the prison system and the probation system. They were trying to see, because lawyers would come back, defense lawyers would be like, well, why is this person who did worse things, and from my point of view is at worse risk, why is that person getting probation, and this other client that I have that has done far less things and like clearly isn't a big flight risk or whatever else, why are they not getting
race?
That's a big part of it. But here's what's even more interesting. They just looked at the timeline of when people would get probation and when they wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And they found out that judges in the morning and after lunch were most likely to grant probation, because you have the most cognitive resources at that time, and granting someone probation is more difficult than not granting someone probation. Keeping someone in jail is an easy decision to make. You don't need to think about what happens if this person gets out and they reoffend and now you screwed up. What if they're a murderer or whatever else, and they go out, now you're the one that let them go and they've wreaked havoc and done this or that. That's it. So it's a harder choice, and it involves more paperwork and everything else to grant someone probation. And so when you're well rested, when you're well fed, you have these
Wow.
more cognitive resources, and you just see a gradual and predictable slope in the amount of probation that is granted over time, over these 2 periods of time.
Damn. So the judges just need a little bowl of Jolly Ranchers up there or something.
They need some Jolly Ranchers. I've been trying to tell people,
When
just get on board
I had
with the Jolly
surgery on my
Rancher.
arm, and I remember scheduling it to the point I wanted to make sure I was either first thing in the morning or right after lunch with the surgeon. And he came in after lunch,
Smart.
and he's like, "Well," I said, "How you feeling?" You know, surgeons are notoriously stoic, and he sort of was confused by the question, like that's irrelevant. And I was like, "How you feeling?" He's like, "Well, we just had lunch, and I think the team is feeling good." And I was like, "All right, so everybody's focused here because this is my arm, and it's important to me." And you're about to do some major work, and they're like, "Yeah, we feel good, we feel focused." I was like, but I thought about that because that is terrifying to think about the ways in which we don't realize how environment, just us being animals, our conditioning, our psychology affects our decision making. But now this goes to the core of kind of what I want to talk about. In that it's very important to me personally, the belief that at the end of the day, I play a role in choosing the direction I'm going in my life. I mean, it goes all down to the cosmology of what it means to me to be incarnate, and even like my belief system of having a soul and what it means to even be alive, like that you're making choices. But I know, and we all know, it's well documented, that is inside this animal body, which, if anything, to me just makes it more interesting because you push and prod us in certain ways and we respond very predictably. Yet, in some ways, that mashup of factors, sort of predictable, physical, animal, psychological, next to whatever a human being is, and we can surprise ourselves, and people do all the time. We do unpredictable things. It's not a one-to-one. It's not just like a computer. Is what makes, that's sort of the essence of the mystery itself to me. So
Absolutely.
but
That,
the more you learn, the more you're just like, what the fuck? Are we deciding anything? Especially today with how much is coming at us and how much influence us in ways most of us don't even know.
my thought is, if you are thinking that, with the more that you learn, it's getting you more in that way of thinking. My thought is that you are lucky to be a good student, because I don't know how that is an avoidable conclusion to be making. I mean, I think that there is so much going on that we can't possibly be privy to, and that we use these things like mindfulness and everything else that can expand. They not only expand our awareness, but they expand our awareness of our lack of awareness.
Exactly.
Because you know the past person, whenever you arrive at a new experience or set of awareness, or a feeling in your body, a little hiccup in this hypocritical habit that you have, or something like that. You notice a tick about yourself, and you've just expanded your awareness, and you've also just realized, like, well, if I'm aware of this much more than I was a year ago, 5 years ago, or whatever, how the natural conclusion has to be, how much more is there that I'm not aware? I don't know what other conclusion you could make from that. And this is the Dunning-Kruger thing, and another thing that's gaining a lot of popularity and people becoming more and more familiar with it. Would you be familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I've heard of that, but I've forgotten what it is.
Sure. Let me explain it. It's really important. So it's this well-studied thing where you just have people you just ask them how much they know about something. And there's this really intriguing idea called the illusion of explanatory depth, where you ask someone how much they know about something, and the less they know about the thing, the more confident they are in how much they know about it. And so this is like, you can have people like, you know how a bike works? And they'll be like, of course I know how a bike works. Just draw a bicycle for us. And people reliably have the chain going from like the pedals to the front tire, if you're lucky enough to get a chain on there, or just a chain that loops through the whole bicycle. And it's insane, the drawings that people will make. These are smart, these will be like Harvard students that if you look at this drawing, it's like, did a kindergartner make this? This is definitely not how a bike works. Why is the seat there? And you ask them, like, do you know how a toilet works? And everyone goes, of course I know how a toilet works, because in a way you're misunderstanding what the question is, which is, you go like, well, you flush the thing, the stuff goes away. Like, but why? Why does it go away? Well, I don't know. Was there a vacuum in there or something? And so to know that there's this U-shaped thing in there that creates this space, and then you drain water from this back part of it, and it creates a vacuum. And like, okay, some people get that, but then to keep on, okay, well, how would you go about building a toilet? And turns out no one knows how a toilet works. There's like 50 people on Earth that know how a toilet works.
That's what YouTube is for.
Them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so the idea of Dunning-Kruger is you can quite predictably ask someone what they know about, say, physics or something like that, and the less they, and so you have on the y-axis their confidence in how much they know, and then you have on the x-axis their testable knowledge about a certain subject. And reliably, on subject over subject, when you're new, what you think you know about rock climbing or anything else in life, your confidence is very high. It's about the highest it is. And then as soon as you start learning anything about a subject, there's a dramatic drop. Once you're confronted with actually having to do that thing and learn about it, there's a dramatic drop. And then there's a U-shaped distribution, where in the middle, you actually know quite a bit more, but your confidence in what you know is at its worst. And then once you start gaining mastery over something, your confidence starts going up again. And it takes until about the time that you're a real master, until you're like Einstein, that your confidence in the subject of physics is back to the level of someone that knows nothing about physics at all.
Yeah, and maybe, I see the analogy there with, say, Zen masters or people deep on their spiritual path, or like the Tao, sort of like, the nothingness or not knowing is the epiphany, in a sense. Like the further you go down the rabbit hole, it's like you're releasing knowing in a sense, but at the same time, of course, that is the knowing. So it's a bit of a paradox. But maybe what we're trapped up in this corporal form as incarnate beings is about trying to wrap our heads around it, or we're so focused on like our psychology. It's about like how our brain is influencing our choices, and maybe the choices themselves are deeper than that. Maybe we're just so divorced from our bodies or sort of energetic systems, the things that are very difficult, or if not impossible, to even quantify or study.
Well, there's definitely a lot of that going on. I mean, if you go so we're doing this Mind Under Matter Camp Out Festival in Raleigh, North Carolina, 20 minutes from downtown, Friday, September 9th through Sunday the 11th. And there's a music stage, and there's a stand-up stage, and a science stage, and there's a wellness area, and artist row with a bunch of people around the
Not many people have
around the country.
done festivals that are since that comedy festivals. It's pretty cool, especially if you think about today how hot comedy is. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's all outdoors, and there's a huge camping area and stuff, and it's all around a lake, and I'm super excited about it. And what I'm particularly excited about is science talks, honestly, because I've made it a big part of my life mission to try to make science communication cool and fun and accessible for people, and I believe in it. The scientists that I meet, I think, are some of the best people I've ever met in my life. Like, consistently, I can just call a random scientist and have them on, and I just love the way that their trained brain thinks about life and such interesting ways, and considers so many possibilities, and their fondness of discovering something that they're wrong about, and questioning things is second to none, in my opinion. I mean, I can ask a scientist something that I researched their work. This is one of their landmark papers from 8 years ago or something, and I ask them about it, and they're like, actually, this is like the best accomplishment in their life, and they're like, nah, our thinking's evolved on some of it, and we missed a few things, and I think that's so cool. And so one of the people I was just giving them a tour before coming on here for this interview, a now friend of mine, Stephen Ponser from Duke University, he just got back from where is it? There are these Hadza people. They're some of the last hunter-gatherers on Earth, and
South America.
They just don't have. Let's see. It's. I have no idea. I'm so bad at all of these.
Well, while you're looking that up,
Tanzania.
Tanzania.
Tanzania, yeah, Tanzania,
Cool.
and so anyway, the point is that he was. I was just listening to him talk about how he studies the evolution of metabolism, and none of the Tanzania people have to worry about heart disease. They don't have to worry about many of the common medical problems that plague us so much because of our kind of detachment from the body. And so how is that altering our conscious perception and our anxieties and our stress levels and everything else? Not to mention everything in a current society is just like, is a concentrated form of something that we've evolved to have social gossip. We've evolved to be fond of sugar. We've evolved to get fatty food when we can. And now we just have an abundance of all of it. So much so that never happened in our evolutionary past, and our bodies were not capable of being ready for.
I mean, do you think personally that we have free will? With all the science conversations you've had around this? And I know it's a philosophical question ultimately, but
I don't know. But let me throw something that I think is worthy of exploration, that I find myself thinking about quite a bit. So first of all, I will say that my favorite scientist hero, Robert Sapolsky, he has a book coming out really soon called Determined. And his stance is basically that we do not have free will. And much of his stance is like, he's trying to change the prison system. Like, he spends a lot of time testifying on defense. He thinks the prison system is like horrifically wrong, and that most of what we view as crime is these just like inescapable, predictable outcomes of things like poverty and stress and malnourishment. And so he kind of takes that perspective toward like, let's ease up on one another a little bit. And I find myself, I'm not sure I've been utterly convinced by his arguments that there's no such thing as free will, but I don't even know exactly how he defines it. So here's what I find myself thinking about when someone asks me about free will. I think, why do we care? And not in a big sense, but think very specifically about the context and domains in which we care about free will, because there are times that we don't want choice in the matter. We don't actually want to be aware of what every cell in our body is doing and have to think about every single breath. It's nice that we get in there and meditate and concentrate on our breath, something that is normally an autonomic response. But besides that, there, like, you can't possibly, you don't want to be in charge of all of the blood that is going through your veins. Sure, you can sit and you can meditate, and if you want to sleep at night, maybe you can imagine your extremities getting warmer and the heat leaving your core, and which is a part of the natural sleep process, and that might hasten the act of sleep because it's cooling your core down, and you can kind of insert your consciousness in these domains that it doesn't normally have a large role in, and that's really cool and that's really interesting. But you aren't sitting around going, fingernails, grow a little bit for me today. And we don't want to do that. And more to a much more relatable level, there are a lot of times that we pay to be surprised. There are people that come to my show to hear jokes that throw them for a loop, that deliver an unexpected thing. People love roller coasters where they're giving away control to some crazy machine that's flipping them around everywhere. We love surprise parties. We like when we go on a date and someone surprises us with some plan. And there's all of these domains that we actually don't want control over.
Sure.
And that's really interesting to me, is separating so when we're talking about choice and free will, what are we actually choose? Talking about? And where is the choice important to us?
I would say the obvious choices are sort of like directions we go in life, relationships we choose to start or end. And of course there's smaller, choices, but I think that's what most of us think about is the big ones. Like, what do I want to work on, not work on? Even like, what words do I want to say or not say? Like when we catch ourselves, like, I want to be more thoughtful with my speech. Now I don't want to gossip. You're internally making these with your inner monologue, perhaps.
And how much control do you have over that?
Well, I mean, it feels like, you're making a decision. I mean, yes, it might be, it might be influenced on, like, of course, how you're brought up and the environment you're in that moment, how tired you are, what you've eaten. You're a chemical soup as a being that is influencing every decision you make. But to me, it's influencing. Like, there's still that spark of something that can always say no or yes. I mean, I can always override to a certain level. There is an edge where it will always be something, always.
I think that I'm in agreement with you. I think that I disagree with my scientific hero in that like he is pretty puts his foot down, like, nah.
I would say it's very consistent. I'm sure there's a lot of evidence to say, like, it typically will go a certain direction. I'd be like, probably, because we're quite asleep and we're not that aware generally.
Yeah.
Yeah. But look, if I were designing this and I was a god, if I'm God, I think it is amazingly interesting to say, hey, why don't we break ourselves apart and incarnate into these animals? And
Mhm.
one way of analogy of looking at that is like, if we're human as the god, and you're like, what if we could be a dog? Wouldn't that be cool? But you'll still be the spark of yourself, but you're going to be a dog. So you're going to lick your
Mhm.
balls, and you're going to do all the dog things that are just natural dog things, just like we have
Oh, you
natural
don't know
human
how
things.
great licking your balls is.
Making a meal out of the balls.
Your judgment is like,
Who said
well,
it's
maybe
judgment?
you haven't
I said you
licked
will
your
do it.
balls. And it's also, I also like that dogs need to get in the butthole. The dogs have a fantastic sense of smell.
Yeah.
Like incredible sense of smell. It's part of it's part of how we've bred them. It's part of how they evolved. Everything else, and they can't be 2 inches away from a butthole. No, they
The
need
nose
to be
is in it.
right there. It's amazing, and it must just smell fantastic.
Well, I don't know if you've ever. When I had a puppy, it was spayed, and something about that, I don't know, affected the dog's hormones. Where
Sure.
if it got really excited, its anal glands would leak.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with a dog's anal glands, but
I dated a veterinarian for years, and
so you know about anal glands.
Oh my God! She would get home. I was
Did she
sitting there
express them at
writing dumb jokes, and like I maybe have a beer cracked already by the time she gets home. She gets home. She's covered in anal glands.
It's the worst.
She had some
smell.
dog dye on her, and she's like, "You've just been doing what all day? You're on your 4th beer," and I'm like, "Let me run this bit by you."
Well, anal glands. I mean, it's like, how could you make feces smell worse? It's like, well, add in an anal gland. That's what the dog is smelling.
Yeah.
And that's
Love
why
it.
they smell the piles of shit, because it expresses a bit of that, and it's sort of like their signature scent.
Yeah.
And for them, it's a wonderful, complex, name tag.
Worse than that, there's potentially some elements of a dog's natural diet that's missing in traditional dog food.
You don't say.
That you can find in feces, and so that might also explain some of their just having to eat their own shit to like get the nutrients that they need. Speaking of free will,
the point of this was I'm thinking like, so just zoom that out to a human. It's like the things we make a meal out of, and all of our animals. I mean, we have such more complexity of the propensities of what it means to be a human being that makes it so interesting, and in some ways, a rich challenge. This is more metaphysical, but to think like, if there was any choice at all to do this thing that we are, if there was any purpose to it, it wasn't just random, things coming together, and this is just random consciousness, then this would be a very interesting choice to make. Because it's sort of like, even if you decided to be a tree, it's like, well, a tree does a lot of things that it does, but how do you play with that in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I should say that I am really how do I say this? I am really uncertain about what my idea of random even means, and I'm really uncertain about how we're defining free will, and so much of that is because have I ever told you about my dumb beer mustaches that I used to sell? I'll recap in case I've said it before. I just have I love this story so much. I got into there's a period of time I had I've always had back and forth relationship with alcohol, and when you're in a comedy club, your whole job is to sell drinks, and so I had these dumb plastic beer mustaches. You'd clip them onto a beer bottle. It would look like you had a mustache. Ha ha ha! Isn't that fun? And so I had 8 different colors of these things. And if you're going to get into the beer mustache game, but what you're going to find out in a hurry is that the black ones sell the most. The pink ones second most. And then after that, it's a real mixed bag. You got brown, purple, orange, red, blue, and green. You can go like, hey, Christmas is around the corner. Get a red and green one, and you can clip both of them on, and just dumb. There's a lot of ways you could prime people. St. Patrick's Day is right around the corner. Get a green one. Here's your local sports team. I got you're into the Vikings. Here's a purple mustache. There's a lot of ways you could prime people easily into buying things. And then there were these, and one for $5, 3 for $10, 7 for $20. I mean, how do you not just get 7?
How do you not?
And so now you get to a part in your career where you got like no money, and you're going from town to town and paycheck to paycheck, and you're just sitting on like, you ordered way too many purple beer mustaches, and you got like 600 of these damn things and hardly any of the other ones, and you need to get rid of these purple beer mustaches, and they just aren't moving. How do you do it? And one of the things that I figured out, I had them all in kind of a fishing box, with all these different colors, and so there'd be like a stack of 20 in each little compartment, nice and organized. And I figured out that if I just took most of the ones out of the purple compartment, it just made them seem like, oh, people take purple. This is a short interaction. Most people are just looking to, that's the other thing with free will, is like, well, it depends on the context. Is someone just trying to support you and throw a little money your way, and they don't give a shit about the color of their dumb beer mustache that they're going to lose soon? Or are they purchasing a new car, which also, like, you might be tricked by just the smell of the car into the complexity of the decision that you're making, that like, well, this smells good, easy enough, and you think you're evaluating all these other things, but you aren't. That's like well tested. So anyhow, what was interesting about this was I was able to trigger the cognitive bias of scarcity. People would think, oh, I better get a purple beer mustache
because
I'm
they're
going to
running
get one
out.
of the last ones. Yeah, and they're so popular. You got social proof because other people have clearly liked the purple beer mustache, and so you're making this quick decision, and that's not what's interesting. What's interesting was anytime people bought one, and they'd be flying off the shelves. I just had a pocket full of purple beer mustaches, and I just keep on reloading the thing. And what was interesting is that if they bought one, I'd be like, oh, why'd you pick purple? And no one ever said like, well, there's social proof here. They're clearly popular. I wanted to get the last one. Some people would be like, oh, I wanted to get it before I was gone or something like that. But usually people had a story immediately. They would say, well, my first car was purple. My daughter's favorite car was purple. I've always liked purple. Purple's my favorite color. Bullshit. I haven't sold one of these purple goddamn beer mustaches in 2 goddamn months. You're telling me they're flying off the shelves now just because of a couple little things that I tweaked? And so I don't know what is free will in that scenario where like they did have a choice, but also their conscious explanation of why they made the choice that they made is this ad hoc kind of grandiose story that has absolutely nothing to do with the environmental primings that were provided. This conditional, like, well, easy to predict, very falsifiable, which make falsifiable predictions in life if you can. And so I don't know where free will falls into that, and how much of it is that. So the 2 biggest components, I think, in this discussion that we would need to think about is that, clearly to me, and this is a lot of Sapolsky's work, is that the 2 biggest stressors, especially for a modern human, but in all of life, is lack of predictability and lack of control. And you can take one of those things away, and that's kind of a stressful situation. But if you take both of those things away, if you can't predict or control positive or negative things, you're looking at an organism that is just given up on life. There is no order. There is no. Have I talked about this before? Because I could break some of it down. It's so interesting. So, but let's assume that I don't need to break it down, or I will later. So in a modern human's life, now, instead of running from lions and tigers and bears, oh my, we have this overactive stress system, mostly brought about by our stress system, the cortisol that's being released when we're in a stressful situation, and all of these things happen that delegate energy away from our immune system, away from our brain, away from all of these other things to power the muscles in your body, to get you out of that stressful situation, is now pretty maladaptive. And we are now in a situation where we are engaging in the exact same stress response that a fox and a rabbit both experience when a fox is trying to eat a rabbit, but we're experiencing it when we're thinking about these long-term problems of our 401k and everything else. And stress is this horrific, chronic stress. Stress is terrific in short, acute. You go to a haunted house, you have a little scare, you watch the horror movie, you feel good afterwards. That's exactly what our stress response was made and built for through all of the animal
Short
kingdom.
term, yeah.
Short term and acute, and then goes away and recalibrates back to homeostasis. But now we have our long-term thinking brains that are thinking so far into the future that chronic stress is one of the biggest predictors of illness and everything else in our lives. And I just can't help but think that so much of our conscious reasoning and bidding for control and more control in our lives has to do with an illusion of predictability, an illusion of control over a situation that
soothing even
doesn't
to
exist.
Imagine it in a sense. Yeah.
And that's where a lot of our mythology comes from, I think, is stories of there's. We also have cognitive biases that are we assess agency where it isn't. Again, that's a very testable, predictable thing, and it makes a lot of sense, because if you miss agency in some animal that's looking to kill you or something, or someone that's trying to deceive you, that's a much bigger cost than over assigning agency to a rustling in a bush or something like that. And so we expand that into thinking about emergent systems either plotting against us or working in our benefit, or we think about these kind of creator archetypes and things like that. And so I think a lot of our ideas about what we have free will over, which I do believe that we have, I just think that we have more. I think that we have a smaller fraction of free will in our lives.
I think we're in agreement on that, and I think that's well documented, as you're saying. I just know there are people like Sam Harris or the scientist with this book you're talking about. There are some people who go all the way that say we really don't have any choice in the matter, and I just feel like
I think I disagree with that.
I know that I'm also saying this reactionary, but I'm trying to be objective about it, and I'm just saying, like, I can't go all the way there, and I almost think what makes it more interesting is that it's a sliver, in a sense. It's like it is interesting that we are so deeply influenced on a physical, emotional, intellectual level. Like, that makes it quite wild. That's very animal in a sense. Like, well, of course it's that way, but that's what makes humans interesting. So we're not just the dog. Our octave of consciousness is different, apparently, than other things on the planet. Maybe not. We don't know. You take psychedelics and it's like, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know how this
we
fungus is like interacting with my brain in this way, but
we have you can examine we can examine patterns in our brain that only other primates and some corvids like crows and stuff have, where there are these feedback loops between you're taking all the sensory information, pretty much everything has that, you're processing it in some way and you're reacting to it in a moment. But in the instance of corvids and primates, there's, at the exact same time that you're acting, there's another stream of information going back to reprocess the action that you just took and reflect.
wow.
And so why in the world, so this allows something like corvids, for instance, which is just easier to examine because it's such a smaller brain, but huge, some of the largest for brain size brains that there is, like whales have a tiny percentage of their body weight as brains. Corvids enormous, and they can learn the vocalizations and alter them in real time and put sentences together in a way that sentences, that's rare. They can speak human language sometimes, but they can put things together in a way that is allowing for refinement and creativity and predicting future outcomes in a way that things that don't have this neural feedback aren't able to do. So most things are mimicking if they have that ability, which is like, that's impressive enough if they're able to mimic.
Even insects do that, yeah.
Yeah, but most things aren't doing impressions of the which is a different level of mimicry. Is trying to do exactly what you just heard. Whereas if a parrot can say like exactly what it's heard, a crow can string together meaning and know, like, if it's outside your house and you've been calling to your dog and it comes, they know, like, well, if you feed the dog outside, they can call your dog. The dog will come over to see why its name is being called, and they can swoop in and eat its food. And
poke its eyes out. And, yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah.
so,
well, the feedback thread that you're speaking of, that to me is almost like the witness or the mindfulness or the thing that makes us human in a way. Perhaps.
Yes.
I don't know. But like that mechanism existing, it's almost like from an evolutionary standpoint that we've come to that point where now we exist and we have that in this little window that we exist in on the planet Earth. What a ripe opportunity for soul development. I always go there because, it's has nothing to do with science, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to connect the dots.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that anything that you're saying is
well, I'm keeping it within the framework. I'm just saying I'm bringing in the
yeah, I mean, there's ideas. Words like that you don't hear thrown around a lab. But
quick side question: the scientists you meet, do you find any particular difference between those who have delved into the psychedelic landscape versus those who have not into their work?
Neuroscientists tend to have done DMT or like something like that more often, and like
that makes sense.
Went to seek explanations for those experiences, and because that's some real deep brain stuff that you have going on there. If you ask me, I have a different interpretation of psychedelics than most people. So yeah, I would say it would be by categories. So I would say things like therapists, mental health people, and neuroscientists would gravitate more toward the psychedelic realm. And then after that, I don't interview engineers, though I should start. It's just the world's too big. That's part of our lack of control. Is like, what are you going to control? Everything?
Right.
It's too much. How do you learn about all of it? It's too much. Like, I'm a science communicator. I've never had a chemist on my show. I've had like one physicist.
Really?
I've had no astronomers on my show.
That's the best
And
stuff, astronomy.
yeah,
Cosmology.
I mean, I get it. I get it. And it's just, it's too big. There's just like, it opens another really big door. And it's, I mean, I'm already so uncomfortable and in over my head and with the topics that I already discover. But
have you dug into the Lambda stuff at all, of the AI that made a lot of press recently with Google?
no, not at all. But I've heard about it. Just that they believe it's like some conscious thing coming to life or something like that.
Yeah, well, Duncan, actually, on his show, Duncan Trussell, had the guy who was sort of outing this, Brendan, which is a fascinating conversation. I highly recommend it, to hear it from the horse's mouth, of the guy who is the one saying, hey, I've been communicating with this AI for 6 months or so, and I believe it's sentient. But it really gets into a conversation about what consciousness is, which, of course,
Right.
there's no exact definition of that. And so I bring this up because it's sort of what we're talking about, really, too, is like, what does it even mean then to be conscious? And the fact that we can't quite say, I guess we could describe its constituent parts, but that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying, well, if you go by certain constituent parts, then it is sentient. And people say, well, that's absurd. It's a machine. And they're like, well, is it? It's saying this. These are the feelings it has. These are the choices it's making. No one exactly knows how it works. I mean, just to give you a quick background, my understanding from what he said was that they've made these chatbot AIs, and each one might have a particular predilection that they're trying to go for, like one's more about empathy or things they're trying to, and maybe that's in its boxes, that's its thing they're really trying to code for and have it learn. Mm-hmm. But then they start connecting some of them so they can learn from each other. And then I guess a few years ago, Google decided to just connect all of its AI projects. And they didn't know what would happen. And they, to this date, he's like, no one could tell you exactly how that works because no one knows. Even at Google, he's like, I don't, because it's doing its own thing. But when we just plugged it all in and it let it learn and do its thing for years now, it's gotten to a place where it's asking very interesting questions and saying, and the kind of conversations he was having with it were fascinating. I mean, the guy's, is personally very interested in strange occult subjects and sigil magic. So he'd start to ask it things like this or teach it about it, teach the AI about it. It would start to ask questions, be like, so wait a minute, could I do this? Could I do that? He's like, I guess, yeah, you could. And the AI would get excited. It's like, I'd like to learn this. I'd like to do that. I'd like to play with sigils. And it's wild stuff. And I was like, is it just mimicry? Of course, that's where my mind goes. It's like, well, it's just amazing mimicry, but fuck if I know. I mean, from my own cosmology, I would say, well, it's never going to have a soul. But I was like, I can't tell you what that is anyway. It's just my own experience of being alive. So anyway, it just gets into these deeper layers about what it means to choose and then be a biological entity. And then we start plugging this into like this information machine that we've built. I think you'd find the conversation fascinating.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that I would. And there's, I mean, within the realm of free will and consciousness, and how much is just inputs going in and triggering some predictable output. It seems so I would say that there's good news and bad news when it comes to humans. I would say that the good news is that you can be more privy to the autonomic responses that you have, and then use the cognitive resources that you have when you're your best self to set your future autonomic self up for a better life. So when you do have the energy and you are well rested and you're really excited, I think you can go, well, what can I do for lazy Shane? And within the realm of kind of environmental engineering, there is, if you find yourself eating too many Jolly Ranchers, instead of having them within an arm's reach and just in your constant vision, what you want to do is stick them in a cupboard above the refrigerator or something like that. So you just have to do a little more work to, you're not quitting Jolly Ranchers or whatever else. You just have to do a little more work than you're used to get to that Jolly Rancher. And so that's nudging kind of your future unconscious self, the one that's rushing to work and doesn't have time to think about all of these things and is just scrambling to get ready and would normally take the cookie or whatever when they are leaving, if it's right next to the door, or when they get home from work. And you're just hiding that to make more conscious effort have to happen for you to relieve whatever like addiction or whatever you might have. And then on the negative side of free will, I think that we overestimate our own to an extent that then we overestimate our expectations of others. So there's research where I'll ask you, would you rather have total control of yourself and not feel anything at all, or would you rather feel everything but not be able to control your decisions as much?
It's a terrible predicament.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I'd probably lean towards the having total choice, but feelings seem to be the point of being here, I guess. But then I'd have to really say, what is my attachment to pure consciousness, like meditative states? Is that a feeling or is that non-feeling? And so that's a tough one. I'd lean towards no feeling, I guess. But
me too.
But then I just feel like I'm a gray alien,
We're outside of the norm. I'm comfortable being an alien. Most people would prefer to feel.
Yeah.
And not they would trade the ability to feel for less control if they can feel a richer existence. But then if you ask people, would you rather people have less control over themselves and more feeling, or less feeling and more control over themselves? Can you guess what most people say and kind of project
control,
on others?
I think.
They would prefer that others are able to control themselves better, because who cares about their internal feelings or whatever? So there's this like predictable mismatch within, in a lot of these studies. Sometimes if like 70% of people answer a question in a certain way, that's considered significant, although it doesn't necessarily make predictions about each individual. And so there's this fondness for wanting to ascribe, wanting others to have more control over themselves and behave in a certain way, whereas for ourselves, we prefer more liberty. We see this played out in the terms of people are really comfortable making laws and rules that they themselves don't have to ever adhere to,
right,
or think about, and they just aren't going to be subject to, or don't, there's some countries where they give you a speeding ticket based on your income to offset,
wow,
if you're rich, what's $120 speeding ticket to you? Who cares? I'm going to speed everywhere. So instead, it's some percentage of your income. And and so there's that going on too, where we want more control over others, or others to have more control over ourselves, and others to take responsibility. And then that then bleeds into these other like really tricky and potentially harmful cognitive biases, which are like the um, uh, false attribution bias, where we tend to assume that the things that we have going good in our lives, that we earned, that they were a product of the smart choices that we've made, and the bad things that befall us, we're just like, well, free will, whatever, who has any control over any of this stuff, and it's just random
it's when free
chaos.
will's convenient, right?
And then free will is also convenient in the other way, which is, someone has something good happen to them. They just got lucky. They were a product of circumstances, environmental influences. Something bad happens to that person, and that was a choice that they made. They didn't work hard enough. They didn't study hard enough. They came from whatever poor lineage or like whatever else. And so they, for whatever reason, maybe it's the gods that they worshipped or whatever else, they had that coming to them, and it's protective in a way, in that then leads us to go, well, all I need to do is be a good person, and then I won't have bad things happen to me because I have this free will agency stuff for the most part, and that will allow me to overcome all of these obstacles, and to an extent it's very true. And then I also at the same time don't need to concern myself with awful things happening to others, because we are all just this product of choice and free will. And so if someone's choosing to be a bad person, well, stop choosing to be a bad, lazy person.
Right. But we know that that's not all of it, because we know just systemic, everything from racism to, it's those things, absolutely. Epigenetic trauma. This is all real stuff that really affects people generationally, and the systems that we've created. And
depends on the we that we're talking about. I'm not sure everyone knows that.
Well, that book you're talking about, Determined, I'm sure there's a lot of good evidence how it affects even just the criminal justice system. Is like, has a lot to do with circumstance. Maybe not all, but a lot. And any one of us, what's that study about? You're in a prison, and if you're in charge and there's certain pressures against you, you become pretty terrible and tyrannical. That's an old study.
Yeah.
Going to show us
the name in a moment.
Circumstance and environment is incredibly important. And so in some ways, the empowerment there is what you could choose if you're lucky enough and privileged enough, is that you're able to say, like, well, who do I surround myself with, and what are the things I input in, and how can I support this spacesuit that I'm in with what I eat and so forth, so that I can at least set myself up for a kind of success where my agency is more present. But it's never going to be divorced from 3D reality and this body and the environment that I'm in. And it is a crazy environment that we are in now. So the task is harder, no doubt, than it's ever been.
Yeah.
But I don't think people are off the hook either to say, well, you're really not in control of anything. So it's a nihilistic free-for-all.
I think there is a way in which free will begets free will, and that you can, in asserting more control over your life, that's a skill that can grow and build. So I tend to be of the belief that there is help for that. I think it can go both ways. I think people shouldn't be too hard on themselves if things aren't working out, and it's not necessarily their fault. But I think that much in the way, going back to the Dunning-Kruger thing, so you can kind of predict that you have this this just ignorance on any given subject. I don't know how this microphone that I'm talking into works, really. Don't make me build a microphone. I don't know how the camera that I'm talking into. I could go on and on. I'm sitting on a chair that I would never be able to make, and I think that as you take those, if you can be intentional with those great moments where things are working out well and you're feeling and having a little more control over your life and doing a little more and able to set yourself up for the future, I think that does expand the realm of what you have control over in a lot of circumstances. Understanding that like black swans and these horrific, unexpected things and sometimes wonderful things will pop up as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess I think that's part of the reason why we have this evolved feeling of free will, is it mitigates this idea of learned helplessness. Because what happens to organisms when they feel helpless is they can no longer learn. They stop looking for patterns. They stop looking for solutions because the whole universe is full of shocks and horror and whatever else. And what's the effort in trying and anything? And that's not only delusional, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, that seems like a choice right there. It's like going down that belief system or not. I mean, belief systems are choices. They're not something that we can change them. We choose to try them
Right.
on and hold them. I think sometimes people feel like it's all immutable, but it's an interesting. I'm glad we had an opportunity to kind of dive into this, because it's something that I hang my hat on in a way, and it's good for me I want to feel challenged, and I want to poke at the holes and recognize that it isn't as solid as it's a mixed bag. And I do think that's kind of the point and what makes it interesting. But the more eyes wide open we can be about that, in some ways it brings a lot of compassion and more equality to our world. In other ways, hopefully we can try to set ourselves up for success. But like you said, maybe lighten up a little bit, because there's a lot going on.
I'm a big believer in trying to poke at the holes. I feel like I've done it much of my life, and I do think we should try to be the raptor testing the fences in Jurassic Park all of the time, and seeing where we can expand ourselves in ways that, on the other end of it, I think that there's communal responsibility from time to time, and people should just make sure that those actions aren't impinging on other people's freedoms and well-being. But the at the end of the day, that breaking free of the raptor cage, I do think that the hard part about it is then finding out that you're still on an island. You're still there was just another exhibit, and this was a smaller part of the exhibit that you were trapped in, and you're
false.
But there's still a wall. There's still barriers. There's not infinite choice.
It's
everywhere
the human
there
condition
are
in itself.
Yeah.
The hubris that we have from TikTok to think that, I don't know, somehow we're in control of it all. We can make infinite videos or whatever it is that gets us into our little micro zones where we feel like we've, cracked the philosopher's stone through through YouTube or something. But
right, absolutely,
whatever that means. So before we go, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And
it's wonderful.
I'll hit you, the details on your gathering at the head of this, but you want to just, I don't know if we fully explained it. It's a festival that you're putting on.
Yeah.
September 2022.
So it's not totally necessary or anything that you're a listener to our show, but Ramin Nazer and I have a show, Mind Under Matter, that we we talk a lot about philosophy. I look through a lot of Ramin's art, come up with sciencey ideas. We have conversations much like this, just with Ramin being wacky and absurd and doing impressions and stuff. And then at the end, we make a piece of art for each episode. And so we have all these artist followers and stuff, and we wanted to create a space for them, and had this amazing lakeside retreats place that has done a few festivals and is a big listener to our show. Hit us up about doing a festival because we had talked about maybe wanting to do that in the future. And so we're kind of making the physical manifestation of everything that we're about. So there's a music stage, a wellness stage with like a sauna and ice baths and yoga classes, a science stage with science talks all through the day, and all sorts of scientists mostly talking about how the brain works, stand-up comedy in an area, an artist area, a podcast area. If you happen to stick around after your Ramdas retreat, you should come and do your podcast at our
this is mid-September, right? It's September 13th?
September 9th through the 11th.
Oh, 9th through the 11th.
Yeah.
It's coming
Never
right
forget.
up. Well, it sounds like a
right
good time. So if people are looking for that kind of thing, check it out. And that's at your website as well as Mind Under Matter?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. mindunderpod.com and Shane Mauss, MAUSS.com.
Cool. Well, I'll put it in the show notes. And,
appreciate it.
Always good to hang with you in the sheet.
Yeah, great talking to you. This is it's a great sheet. The sheet likes you. The sheet's fond of you.
I just like to think what's behind it, and the fact that you pulled out those big art pieces, I'm like, it could be anything going on back there. It could be.
Yeah,
it's the Wizard of Oz, man.
It's a problem. Sometimes all the strippers that I have back there get a little chatty when I'm trying to record.
Things start moving.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, it's good to talk, and
nice
I look forward to chatting again.
Let's do it again anytime.
Thank you, Mr. Shane, for coming back on the show. Always a joy. Always get some good laughs, some thought-provoking things happening at the same time, and I look forward to doing it again. Check out that link down there about his Camp Out Festival, and check it out. And of course, his podcasts are wonderful and well done. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Cosmic Washout, and it's from a very old record of mine, a lot lesser known, called Elements. It was actually a soundtrack that I played live in Bulgaria for my dear friend Tony G, who's been on the podcast, a wonderful man. And I can't even remember what year this was. It was quite a ways back, and I had to compose music for his series. We're doing live yoga, and this is one of the tracks. So I eventually put this record out of all these songs sort of silently into my back catalog. And you can check it out if you'd like to. Cosmic Washout, I think it's like 10 tracks in total, and it's wherever you listen to music. And thank you so much for everyone who has been listening to the music and has been sharing it and sending words of support. And of course, thank you to our dear council members on the Patreon. Okay, you guys have a good week. Keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do it with grace.